The jacket didn't flap so much as breathe. Black fleece draped across a low pine limb 6 feet off the ground, 12 miles from any marked trail. The wind ran its fingers through the needles and the fabric shivered like it remembered the man who wore it. In the left pocket, a damp slip of lined paper, weighted edges swollen from seasons of weather and silence. Drop your city in the comments and subscribe if stories like this remind you how quickly peace can disappear. I've lived my whole life under these hills where the mornings come on pale and honest, and you can hear your neighbor's pickup cresting the frost-rutted road before you see his headlights. After 30 years as a game warden, I retired to a small salt box outside Stowe. 2 bedrooms, wood heat a porch that faces north, so snow lingers long past when the calendar says it should. My days slowed into a rhythm I could manage coffee at dawn, a check on the woodpile, a walk down to the brook with the dog. Afternoons spent helping folks figure out fence lines, trail signage, and the kind of small problems that don't make the paper but keep a town steady. If I wasn't out with the volunteer search and rescue group, I was at the firehouse making sure the radios charged and the maps were folded right. Sarah Bennett lived 3 doors down the gravel in a cedar-sided ranch with a red mailbox and a tendency to bake when she was nervous. She'd bought a weathered A-frame up the road, a 1960s build with big glass facing the pines, and turned it into a short-term rental that kept the lights on. She did it right. Moved slow, changed. Nothing that didn't need changing kept the old stovepipe and the creaking stair that made you lift your toes a little higher after dark. When the snow line retreated and the sap buckets came down, hikers drifted in. They came for the ridge lines and left with a picture taken on a rock they couldn't name. Most were kind, most were tidy, and most waved when they passed you on the road. Spring 2021 started cooler than folks liked, with nights dipping into the low 30s and afternoons that couldn't decide if they were done with March. You could smell mud in the ditches, wet, earth-thawed leaves, and the last of the plow berms slumped into the culverts like tired shoulders. Sarah and I would talk along the mailbox row about trailheads where the ruts were deepest, where cell service cut out, which pull-offs still had ice at the shaded end. The conversation always came back to the same small-town pledges: keep people safe, keep the woods respected, keep the road clear enough for an ambulance if you ever need one. I met Michael Reed the way I meet a lot of city folks, through a borrowed smile and a "you're the one who knows the good paths right." Sarah had asked if I minded stopping by the A-frame on Friday evening to help her show him the wood stove, because sometimes the chimney cap rattled when the wind pushed from the west. I pulled into the narrow gravel drive just before dusk. The A-frame windows held the last of the light like a memory gold in the glass black pushing in from the tree line. Sarah stood on the steps in a denim jacket, hands tucked under her elbows. The guest lean, quiet, dark hair smoothed back, opened the door, and thanked us like he meant it. "Michael," he said, "appreciate the help. I like to know how not to burn the place down." We laughed and I showed him the draft damper, how you listen for the note in the flue, how the stove hums when you've got the air right. He stood close enough to see, but not so close you had to step around him. That's how I remember him, considerate in small ways. He wore a black fleece gray trail pants, ankle socks just visible above new trail shoes. His pack lay on the chair by the window, blue with a narrow belt strap that said he was used to carrying light. No television in the cabin. A paperback near the bed. A folded map on the table, actual paper with contour lines in brown and water printed a soft blue. I find it's the paper maps that tell you who a person is. Phone maps will get you there. Paper maps tell you when to stop. We stood in the doorway while the stove found its breath. He asked about the ridge routes, what was reasonable for a first morning where the views were without forcing things. Sarah gave him the gentle one's first loops that held to the shoulder and came home before the day got long. I mentioned a 6-mile ridge that would test his legs but not his judgment, with a lookout where the wind carries balsam and snowmelt in the same breath. He listened the way you listen when you're thinking 3 steps ahead. Not impatient exactly, just already placing his feet on the climb. The town felt preoccupied that week. Kids at the general store were still arguing over school sports starting up again. The diner had a hand-lettered sign warning folks the price of bacon went up 50 cents with the supplier's new invoice. Up on the long road, a culvert had gone soft, and Public Works flagged it with an orange cone that promptly blew into the ditch and had to be retrieved by the same guy 3 times running. Life ran on coffee stubbornness and the way neighbors don't let you get away with too much. By Saturday dawn, the air settled into the high 30s, and every sound carried tires crushing grit. A crow making himself important, the single click of a door latch when a guest decides morning is worth meeting halfway. I was in my kitchen pouring a second cup when a set of footsteps drifted through the pines from up the road, measured unhurried the pace of someone who wants to arrive but isn't chasing anything. The dog lifted his head and let it drop. Out the window I saw the A-frame's porch light wink off, and for a second the glass held a reflection of the person who'd just stepped out. Then the reflection was gone, the door sealed the warm air inside, and the day took him. After breakfast, I walked down the road to check the small trail kiosk I keep nailed to a sugar maple, updated a laminated note about mud season, and replaced a missing pin on the Hunter access gate. A mile past that, I waved to Bill Pruitt as he hauled salt blocks for his woodlot. He's one of those men who talks in nods and hands 2 fingers off the wheel for hello, a palm out the window to say after you. He told me deer were moving higher than usual for April noses in the wind like something unsettled them. I said it was just the shift in weather. He said maybe. He has a way of putting a maybe that I carry home and look at again. By noon, the sun had done what it could and gave up. The sky went pewter, and the air hung with that hollow quiet you get before a change. Sarah texted that she'd be baking bread if the power held steady, which meant her hands needed something to do. When I walked up to her place, the house smelled like yeast and cinnamon, and the kitchen looked like the good kind of mess flour on the counter, a dish towel draped over a heating loaf. She asked if I'd noticed the crosswalk sign at the school still blinking at odd hours. I told her I'd call it in. Then she asked if I thought the trailheads were too busy for mud season. "Folks need out," I said. "Just keep the rangers informed when the lots overflow." She nodded and looked past me toward the A-frame. "Quiet guest," she said. "Some are," I said. "There's a comfort in that," she said, and laughed the small laugh people do when they want you to know they're fine. Late afternoon pressed against the trees until dark, won by sheer patience. I stepped back onto the porch and watched a single set of headlights ease along the main road and disappear around the bend toward the town line. Night fell clean. Owls worked the low branches. The temperature slid back toward freezing. In these parts, the dark is complete enough you think in shapes and distances more than colors. The wood stove at my place ticked as it cooled, and the dog settled with a sigh that sounded like an old man lowering himself into a pew. Sunday passed in chores, the kind that keep a place honest. I cleaned the stovepipe, checked the roof line for loosened shingles, found none. Midday, I drove down to the covered bridge and back just to listen to the deck boards chatter under the tires and watch a fly fisherman work the brown water below. At the general store, I picked up bacon at the new price and 2 bags of feed that cost more than last month's on account of transport. People came and went faces you knew, names you could place with a little effort. A postcard life, except it's never a postcard from the inside. It's mail and receipts and handshakes so dependable you forget to notice them. By evening, a low roof of clouds stacked over the Mansfield Ridge. You learn to read it how the darker band means rain threaded with cold, how the brighter edge means it'll pass with nothing more than a spit. The radio crackled with the usual a fender bender near the rotary, a false alarm from an oil burner, a reminder about a school board meeting. I cleaned my coffee mug and set it upside down in the rack like my father taught me. Let things dry themselves when they can. The week ahead looked ordinary in the way that makes you trust it a little too much. I was due to check a timber boundary with a landowner on Tuesday, then help the SAR group replace a damaged sign on Wednesday where the trail splits near a stream crossing that turns ankles if you aren't watching. Sarah had renters lined up through May. She'd mentioned she'd swing by the A-frame late Monday morning to collect the key and turn the sheets, then meet me at the trailhead to look at the broken post. Her plan sounded routine enough that we didn't mark it down. We never write down the things we're sure will happen. We just say them out loud and move on. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a dog-eared road atlas, even though I could have pulled up a map on my phone. Habit, I guess. I traced a finger over the ridge where the air thins and the spruce smell changes, and I thought about a man spending a week on foot setting down whatever weight he brought with him. I pictured him at the cabin table folding and refolding a single map until the creases made their own sense. It was a steady picture, plain human, and it held. Just after midnight, the wind woke and patted around the corners of the house, not hard, just testing the nails. I got up, threw another split in the stove, and stood at the window long enough for my breath to ghost the glass. Down the road, the A-frame sat square in the trees, not a light on, nothing to set it apart from any of the other dark shapes in that stand. The forest keeps its own counsel. That's what I've always said. It lets you pass if you carry yourself right and keeps an eye on you if you don't. Morning came with a dull shine on the puddles and the sense of having turned a small page you didn't notice you'd turned. I set out the trash, waved to a delivery truck that missed the driveway and had to back up in 3 careful moves, then checked the sky like a man checking his watch. Around 10, I stepped onto the road with a handrail post and a driver's bit, planning to meet Sarah by noon the way we'd said. A jay broke the quiet with that rusty hinge call, and somewhere up the hill I heard a door click. The sound carried, then died. I walked a few paces and stopped. It might have been nothing. Half my life is made of the nothings you only notice when you look back. But I remember the porch light at the A-frame shining in the daytime. It wasn't bright. It was the weak kind of bulb folks use so they don't slip on the steps at night. Still, it shouldn't have been on. I told myself she must have flipped it to check the fixture, or the guest had left it that way. I told myself a lot of reasonable things and kept walking. By late morning, I was standing at the trail, split hand on the broken post, waiting for Sarah's tires to crunch the gravel the way they always did, slow over the washboard, quick through the smooth. The breeze kept threading the spruce tops and letting go over and over like a thought you mean to finish and never quite do. The minute stretched, then another. The road curved out of sight. My phone stayed quiet in my pocket, and the woods around me held steady calm as a held breath. I stood by that broken trail post longer than I should have, the kind of waiting that doesn't start as worry, just habit. Sarah was never late. Not once in the 5 years I'd known her. When another 10 minutes passed, I figured she might have stopped by the cabin first, maybe a quick cleanup before heading out. The breeze off the ridge smelled of pine sap and damp soil, but something about the quiet didn't sit right. Even the birds seemed further away than usual. I walked back toward the A-frame, slow at first, then faster boots, scuffing gravel that still held morning dew. When her car came into view, parked at an angle near the porch, I knew something was off. The driver's side door hung open, engine off radio, faint under the silence. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her phone pressed to her ear, voice low but tense. When she saw me, she lowered it and said, "He's not here, Evan. He's gone." At first I thought she meant checked out early, but the look on her face stopped that thought before it formed. She said the front door had been locked when she arrived, curtains half drawn, no sound inside. "Everything's still here," she said. "His things, even his phone." I followed her inside, ducking under the low beam, and the air hit me with that still stale feel a place gets when it hasn't been lived in for a few days. The bed was unmade clothes folded in a suitcase near the wall. A mug sat on the counter with a film across what was left of coffee. His phone charger light blinked blue beside a neatly coiled cord. On the nightstand, wallet keys, a folded grocery receipt from the week before. Nothing about it looked like someone who planned to vanish. I asked how long it had been since checkout. She said 2 hours past the deadline, maybe 3. I called the sheriff's office from her kitchen, told dispatch it might be nothing, but we'd feel better if someone took a look. The deputy who showed up was young, new to the department. He wore that kind of easy confidence small towns give to people who haven't been tested yet. He asked a few questions, took down names, walked the property. His eyes caught on the rental car in the driveway, a silver Subaru still dusted with pollen. "Maybe he's hiking," he said. "Happens every season." I told him that may be true, but folks don't leave their wallet and phone behind. He said they'd give it a day just to be sure. Sarah spent that night calling every local hospital just in case. I stayed close by fixing her front porch light so she wouldn't sit alone in the dark. Around 10, she brought out a bottle of ginger ale, poured half into 2 glasses like we were keeping watch at a vigil no one had called yet. She said the man Michael Reed had seemed perfectly fine when she met him Friday. Polite, quiet, maybe a little worn out from the drive. He had one of those calm voices, she said, like he thought before he spoke. She told me he'd asked about the trails, taken notes, even thanked her twice for the list she'd sent him earlier that week. "I've rented to hundreds of people," she said, "but I can't shake the feeling I should have noticed something." I told her not to do that to herself. You can't read a stranger's weather until you've stood in it. By Tuesday morning, the deputy came back with Detective Paul Garrity. Paul and I had worked a handful of cases together over the years, mostly lost hikers and occasional runaway. He wasn't one for talk until he had something solid. He started with the basics when Michael arrived, when he was last seen, whether he'd mentioned plans. Sarah told him everything she remembered. Paul took notes and asked to see the security feed from her door camera. She'd installed it 2 summers earlier after a bear tore through her trash one too many times. We played it on her tablet, grainy footage timestamp clear. There he was, Saturday morning, 7:04 a.m., walking down the porch steps. Black fleece gray pants, blue pack. He paused by the car, opened the driver's door, leaned in, then shut it, and headed down the gravel drive toward the road. That was it. The camera caught the trees swaying in his wake, but not which way he turned. Paul watched it 3 times, then looked at me. "Could be he decided to walk from here," he said. "Trailhead's 4 miles. He looks like he's packed light." We both knew that was a long way to start a hike, especially with rain forecasts that weekend. He asked Sarah if she'd mind showing him inside again. Together we went room to room. The place felt untouched, caught mid-breath. His laptop rested on the desk lid, down charger still coiled. Nothing looked rummaged through, no signs of a struggle. In the bathroom, his razor sat on the sink beside a travel-sized toothpaste lined up neat. By afternoon, Paul filed the missing persons report, and the sheriff's office began making calls, hotels, ranger stations, border patrol. No one had seen him. That night, the temperature dropped to 37, and the rain came in soft sheets that lasted till dawn. When Wednesday broke clear, search and rescue deployed 2 teams. I joined one of them. We started from the Sunset Ridge trailhead, working out in a fan pattern through switchbacks still slick from the storm. The ground gave underfoot, and water trickled down the grooves in the rock like sweat. We called his name every few hundred feet, waited for any echo that wasn't our own. By noon, we'd covered the main loop 6 miles round trip, no footprints newer than Sundays. No tire marks in the parking lot that matched the Subaru. I remember the smell of wet pine needles and mud, the sound of dogs panting behind us, the radio static that comes and goes depending on the ridge. Each time it went quiet, you could almost feel the forest leaning closer, listening. Late in the day, a helicopter swept overhead, the blades chopping the still air heat shimmer tracing through the branches. From above, it looked calm. From below, it was too much space, too much possibility. By Friday, there were 60 volunteers, and the search grid stretched 5 miles around the cabin. Old campsites, collapsed shelters, trash from forgotten seasons, all logged and cleared. Not a sign of him. You could see it starting to weigh on people, the way eyes darted to the ground as if expecting an answer in the dirt. That evening, Paul called off the official search, at least until new information came in. Sarah stood beside me in the dusk as the trucks pulled out one by one. "It feels wrong to stop," she said. I told her I knew, but you can't search a mountain into giving up what it wants to keep. Over the next week, Michael's family drove up from Connecticut. His parents stayed at a small inn near the river. His sister arrived from Philadelphia. They brought stacks of flyers, his photograph smiling up from each page. I helped them post some along Route 100 and in every store window that would take one. The mother's hands shook when she held the tape roll. I'd seen that kind of grief before, the kind that's still searching for where to land. They spoke softly, always thanking everyone as if politeness could somehow summon him home. Paul got a warrant to check Michael's laptop. I sat with him when he opened it. The screen lit with a simple desktop background, blue as sky. No password. We started through his folders expecting photos or trip plans. Instead, we found pages of notes, coordinates, elevations, weather logs. There were maps marked in pen digital pins spread across 3 states and article clippings about hikers who'd gone missing in the 90s and early 2000s. Not famous cases, just people who'd vanished quietly between the trailheads and the tree line. One name kept repeating: Daniel Cormier, a grad student who disappeared in New Hampshire back in '98. No trace ever found. Paul frowned. "You think he was researching this stuff?" he asked. "Or tracking something I didn't know? Maybe he just liked puzzles. Maybe he found comfort in reading about others who'd walked off the map." When we contacted his ex-girlfriend, she said she'd never heard him mention any of it. She sounded shaken, told us he'd always been steady, the kind of man who returned calls, paid bills, stuck to plans. He wasn't reckless, she said. He was predictable in the best way. Weeks passed, and the forest bloomed again, trillium under the birches, trout lilies near the creeks. Sarah boxed up what was left of his things, labeled everything neat, waiting for the family to claim it. Life kept its shape on the surface, but the case never left anyone's mind. Some nights I'd walk the same road he did that morning just to see it in different light. The gravel gleamed faintly under the moon, the air sharp with the smell of hemlock and cold earth. I'd reach the bend where the camera lost sight of him and stop. It was impossible not to wonder which direction he took. Through summer and into fall, no new leads came. Every few weeks, Paul checked in with me just to talk it through again. He said sometimes missing persons stay missing because they want to be. I said maybe, but not like this. Not without a word. By winter, the snow layered the mountains thick and deep. The cabin stayed booked, though Sarah kept the story quiet unless guests asked. When they did, she told them the truth as plainly as she could. A man came to rest, went for a walk, and never came back. Then, almost a year and a half later, on an October afternoon, my phone rang. It was Bill Pruitt. His voice carried that measured calm he used when something wasn't right. "Evan," he said, "you need to see what I found up in the Green Mountain tract." He told me he'd been walking a ridgeline, same place he hunted every fall when he saw fabric caught in a low pine branch. A black fleece, weather-worn but intact. I could hear the unease behind his words, the way a man talks when he knows he's stepped into someone else's story. By the time I met him near the logging road, the light had started to thin through the trees. He led me a half-mile into the brush, and there it was, the jacket swaying gently where he'd left it exactly as he'd found it. The air smelled like wet moss and cold metal, the kind of scent that tells you the season's almost done. Bill pointed at the left pocket. "There's a note," he said. He'd folded it back up after taking pictures. I pulled it out carefully, paper soft with moisture. Coordinates, a date from the spring of his disappearance, and one sentence written in fading blue ink. I didn't read it aloud. The words were too final for that moment. When Paul arrived the next morning, we sent the jacket to the lab, logged the coordinates, and began planning a search. Standing there, 12 miles from the nearest trailhead, I thought about that cabin and the quiet man who'd stepped off its porch at sunrise 2 springs ago. Maybe he'd reached this ridge on purpose. Maybe he hadn't. The note in my hand didn't say why, just that he'd made it farther than he thought he would. Whatever that meant, the forest had held its answer longer than anyone could stand. We started toward the direction those numbers pointed deeper into the trees. The light filtered green and gold through the canopy, the air still. Every step felt like crossing a line between then and now, between what we could prove and what we could only imagine. The map on Paul's GPS glowed faintly in the dim shade, a blinking dot moving through a sea of contour lines. Somewhere ahead, 8 miles farther, waited a clearing none of us had seen, and maybe something left behind to tell us if Michael Reed ever truly meant to come back. The first morning of the new search was colder than I expected for early November. We parked at the edge of a washed-out logging road, engines ticking as they cooled, the sound fading into a silence that seemed to settle over the entire mountain. There were 12 of us state police, a few of us from the volunteer search and rescue group, a pair of K-9 handlers, and Detective Garrity leaning over a map spread on the hood of his truck. The coordinates from Michael's note pointed nearly 8 miles past where Bill had found that jacket into a section of forest where the contour lines folded tight together like a clenched fist. I remember the smell of wet pine needles, the bite of metal in the air from the cold. Paul traced the route with his finger, said, "We follow the ridge till we can't then drop east. No heroics. The ground will tell us if he was here." He looked up at me and added quietly, "He made it this far. He didn't just disappear into nothing." We started in pairs, our boots crunching frost on old leaves. The dogs wove ahead, noses to the wind. There wasn't much talking. Every sound felt magnified. The creak of a strap, the click of a carabiner, the soft rhythm of breath. After an hour, the road gave way to nothing but deer runs and half-collapsed saplings. The deeper we went, the thicker the quiet became. Somewhere around mid-afternoon, the GPS finally beeped the little screen, blinking to say we'd reached the coordinates. We spread out slowly, each person scanning their section of ground like it might answer back. The clearing wasn't much, just a shallow dip in the land surrounded by spruce. In the center was a ring of stones blackened on one side. Someone had burned fires there not once but many times. The ash was crusted under a mat of pine needles, rain-soaked but distinct. A few feet away, a tarp hung in shreds between 2 trees, its edges bleached gray. Beneath it lay bits of charred wood foil from food wrappers, a flattened water bottle, even a piece of paracord tied into a loop that had long since frayed apart. No sign of a body, no sleeping bag, no pack. Just the outline of a life paused and erased by weather. Paul knelt beside the stones, brushing the ash with his gloved hand. "This isn't old," he said. "Maybe a year. Maybe less." He motioned for the K-9 team to work the area. One of the dogs whined and pawed near the edge of the clearing, but the soil gave up nothing except the damp smell of decay, animal, not human. We spent the rest of the afternoon combing every direction, marking each find in orange tape, bagging anything that might hold trace evidence. I took photos, though. After a while they all looked the same. Wet leaves, gray sky, fragments of someone's last attempt to stay alive. When we hiked back out, daylight slipped away fast, and the forest turned blue in the way it does right before dark, when you can't tell where the ground ends and the air begins. Back at the trucks, the heater's hum felt almost sinful after that cold stillness. Paul leaned against the tailgate, eyes on the tree line. If he made it here, he said, what made him leave? He had fire shelter food wrappers. He could have stayed put. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. The lab results came in a week later. The DNA on the tarp and the food packaging matched Michael. No doubt about that. But it didn't tell us when he'd been there or where he'd gone afterward. The ink on the note from the jacket suggested late spring or early summer, meaning he'd survived at least days, maybe weeks after walking out of the cabin. The thought of him alive out there, building fires, scribbling coordinates, trying to map his way through a wilderness that didn't care, sat heavy on me. It's one thing when the woods take someone quick. it's another when they let him linger. Paul spent nights poring over Michael's laptop again, this time plotting every coordinate the man had saved onto a digital map. When he called me to his office, the screen looked like it had come down with a fever dots scattered across 3 states, most in northern New England. I leaned closer. Some clustered around old disappearance sites I recognized from case files. Others stood alone in blank green swaths of forest. He was chasing something, Paul said, or connecting something. One set of numbers caught his eye, coordinates from an unsolved case out of New Hampshire, a hiker named Daniel Cormier, who vanished in the late 90s. Michael had marked that one with a red pin. The campsite we'd found lay roughly 15 miles west of it across rough country, but reachable if you knew the ridges. Paul contacted the New Hampshire State Police for their old files. Most of the evidence was long gone, but the location still matched a research area near the Pemigewasset Wilderness. The resemblance was eerie. Same season, same kind of terrain, same clean disappearance. What if he was retracing the path, Paul murmured. I thought about the phrase from the note I made it farther than I thought I would. Farther than who? Than Cormier. Or farther than himself. A few days later, Paul asked Michael's ex-girlfriend to meet with us again. She arrived carrying a worn folder of photos she'd kept from their time together. Ordinary things, weekend hikes, birthday dinners, a cat perched on a desk. She said he'd started taking solo trips near the end, weekend drives up north, always saying he needed to reset. He'd come back quieter, but calm, never reckless. She hesitated before adding, he had this look sometimes like he was remembering something I didn't know about. It was all we had, but it deepened the unease like we were reading the first half of a sentence that never finished. By early December, the snow came down steady. Search operations paused, though we kept eyes out for hunters or hikers who might stumble across something new. That was when a call came from a woman out on a day hike near the same ridge where the jacket had been found. She'd noticed a small stack of stones, 3 flat rocks balanced carefully on a boulder beside a frozen stream. Not unusual in the backcountry, but she said it looked deliberate, not weather-made. She'd taken a photo and posted it to a hiking forum asking if anyone knew its purpose. Someone recognized the location and reached out to the sheriff's office. Paul and I drove up the next morning. The snow was ankle-deep, the air so cold it made our words hang visible. The cairn stood just where she'd described a quiet marker in the middle of nowhere. When I brushed away the snow, something glinted beneath the top rock, a plastic bag sealed tight. Inside was another torn piece of lined paper, the same type as before. The handwriting trembled uneven, but unmistakable. 2 things written on it, another set of coordinates and a name, Daniel C. We didn't speak for a long time, just the crunch of our boots, shifting weight, the wind whispering through dead branches. Paul finally said, he's leading us somewhere. Then, almost to himself, or he's chasing a ghost. The new coordinates pointed north, straight toward the Vermont-Quebec border into territory even less mapped than what we'd just covered. He filed the paperwork to coordinate with Canadian authorities, but winter hit hard that year. Every access road vanished under snow. The plan was to wait until thaw. Waiting is the hardest part of this kind of work. It gives you too much time to think. Michael's family held a small memorial that January. They didn't call it a funeral, just a gathering. I stood in the back with Sarah watching his mother place a photo beside a candle. He loved the woods, she said softly to no one in particular. I just wish they'd loved him back. The church smelled of pine cleaner and old hymnals, and for a moment it felt like the whole town exhaled the same tired breath. Still, Paul kept the case open. He told me once he'd never had one dig under his skin quite like this. Feels like he's leaving breadcrumbs for someone, he said. But every time we follow the trail just folds back on itself. I knew what he meant. There's a difference between being lost and wanting to be gone. Michael's trail looked like both. By April, the snow pulled back from the lower valleys, and a small group of volunteers folks who'd helped in the first search decided to hike toward the second set of coordinates on their own. Paul didn't officially approve it, but he knew he couldn't stop them. They were experienced, equipped, and meant well. 3 days later, they reached the spot. What they found was nothing. No camp, no note, no trace of anyone ever being there. Just dense forest wet from meltwater, quiet enough to make your ears ring. When they returned, one of them told me she'd stood there for nearly an hour trying to feel if something had happened in that place. "It's like he vanished twice," she said. And she was right. Whatever story Michael Reed was writing with his steps, it ended in unfinished lines scattered across 2 countries, and a silence that no one's been able to fill. That spring, I went back to the A-frame with Sarah. She'd kept it running, new guests every weekend, fresh paint on the trim, but she said she still saw him sometimes in small ways. The mug he'd left behind. The outlet where his phone once charged. I helped her stack firewood, and as we worked, she said quietly, "Do you think he found what he was looking for?" I told her I didn't know. The truth is, I think about that more than I should. Some people go into the woods to find peace. Others go to prove the world still holds mystery. Maybe he was both. A few months later, Paul retired. I stopped by his house on his last day. His desk was cleared, but on the corner sat a single evidence photo, the jacket on that branch swaying in the light. He looked at it for a long moment before slipping it into a drawer. "If anyone ever figures this out," he said, "it won't be through luck. It'll be through listening. I still walk the ridges, sometimes slower now. When the wind cuts through the pines, it carries that faint scent of smoke and wet stone. Every so often I think I hear something, maybe the whisper of fabric, maybe just my own memory replaying the sound of a jacket stirring in the air. Whatever it is, it always makes me stop and look back, half expecting to see a man in a black fleece standing between the trees, waiting to tell me he made it farther than he thought he would. When the thaw came that spring, it brought with it the kind of air that smells alive again, mud pine sap, the sweetness of things waking up. But in our line of work, spring also means what winter hides will start to show. The snow pulls back, rivers swell, and what was frozen quiet begins to whisper. I remember standing by the county garage one morning in April watching the runoff trace thin silver lines down the ruts in the road when Paul called. His voice carried that same old weight I'd learned to recognize something new, maybe not good, but worth hearing. "They're going back up," he said. "Those volunteers from last year, heading for the border coordinates this weekend." He paused, like he expected me to argue, but I didn't. Some people can't let a story end without walking the last page themselves. They left on a Friday, 5 of them, same group who'd hiked the ridge the year before. Experienced, well-equipped, determined in that quiet way that looks like calm, but isn't. They had GPS units, satellite communicators, enough supplies for 4 days. I wasn't officially part of the team this time, but I followed their updates from town as they posted brief check-ins through the emergency channel. The coordinates matched the second note, the one we'd found in the cairn with Daniel C.'s name. North Country, near where the Green Mountains roll into Canada, and the trees start to change species without asking permission. Remote, steep country where you can walk a full day and never cross your own tracks. The second night they were gone, I barely slept. It wasn't worry exactly. It was that same unease that sits behind your ribs when something's not finished. Around dawn on the third day, one of the volunteers pinged a message through the relay, reached the site. Nothing visible. Will document and return. That was it. 16 words to end 2 years of chasing ghosts. When they came back down on Monday, I met them at the trailhead. They looked tired, sunburned in the way cold air can do, eyes a little hollow. One of them, a woman named Claire I'd worked with before, handed me her notebook. We found nothing, she said. No camp, no marker, no sign anyone had ever been there. She hesitated, then added, "It felt empty, though not forgotten." I flipped through her sketches, trees, rocks, a creek bend, all ordinary, all the same shade of absence. Paul came out later that week to debrief them. We sat in a circle at the firehouse, the smell of diesel and coffee in the air. He listened more than he spoke, nodding slow as each person described the terrain. At the end, he closed his notebook and said, "Sometimes that's the answer. Sometimes nothing is the story." But I could tell it didn't sit right with him either. The weeks that followed slipped into that quiet rhythm again, the one where life insists on continuing. The cabin kept renting. Sarah kept baking bread and pretending she didn't glance toward the driveway every time she passed her window. Spring edged into summer, and with it came tourists' long weekends, the hum of normalcy that tries its best to erase what came before. Still, every so often, someone would ask about the missing man, the one who'd walked out and never walked back. Word travels slow but steady in small towns. She'd answer kindly, always the same. "We never found him, but we still look." I visited her one afternoon in July, helped stack firewood behind the cabin. The air buzzed with black flies, and the smell of split spruce clung to our clothes. Inside the place looked the same as it always had, tidy, simple, lived in. She'd replaced the rug and repainted the trim, but the corner where his suitcase once sat was still bare, as if she couldn't quite bring herself to cover it. "It feels different here," she said quietly. "Like the air has memory." I didn't argue. Some spaces do. Around that same time, Paul called me from his office. I could hear boxes being packed in the background, his retirement looming. "You know," he said, "this case will probably stay open longer than I'll be alive to see it solved." He let out a small laugh, more sigh than sound. "I've been thinking," he continued, "maybe we've been looking at it wrong. Maybe Michael wasn't lost. Maybe he was following something the rest of us couldn't see." That thought hung with me for days. I kept going back to that note from the jacket. I made it farther than I thought I would. It didn't sound like despair. It sounded like someone reaching the edge of something, an answer, a limit, a promise kept only to himself. If he'd been tracing those coordinates, connecting old disappearances, maybe he believed he'd found the place where the pattern ended. And if so, maybe he'd done what he came to do. The story should have ended there, but it didn't. Not for me, and not for a man named Bill Pruitt. He was the one who'd found the jacket all those months ago. In the fall of 2024, I ran into him at the diner, same booth he always took by the window. He was thinner than before, beard gone gray at the edges. We talked about hunting season, the new regulations, the usual. Then almost offhand, he said, "I went back up to the ridge last week." I stopped stirring my coffee. "The same ridge I asked?" He nodded. Couldn't help it. Just felt like I needed to. He told me he'd walked the same path he had that day, right down to the tree where the jacket once hung. The branch was bare now. Needles browned from a beetle blight that had swept through. Place looked smaller, he said, like time took a bite out of it. He'd stood there a long while listening to the wind move through the trees, the faint hiss of leaves rubbing together. "You ever stand somewhere," he asked, "and feel like the land remembers more than it should?" I said I had. He looked out the window, then his reflection overlapping with the moving cars beyond. "That note," he said quietly. "The part about making it farther. I think about that sometimes. Farther toward what? Or maybe farther from." His voice trailed off, and neither of us said another word for a while. After he left, I sat in that booth longer than I meant to, the coffee cold and untouched. Through the window, the late autumn light hit the ridge in the distance, soft golden, fading fast. I thought about how the world keeps moving, even when the story hasn't. How a single man can vanish, leaving behind only lines on a map and a sentence that reads like both a confession and a farewell. When I got home, I walked out to the porch, the air crisp enough to sting. From there, I could see the same stretch of road Michael had taken that morning, the way it bends into the trees and disappears from sight. The forest beyond looked calm, unthreatening, almost gentle. But I knew better. It keeps what it chooses. Sometimes it keeps a man's body. Other times it keeps his secret. That night I opened the old file box I'd kept in my shed, the one marked Read. Inside were copies of the reports, photos, maps, even printouts of his notes. I laid them out on the table under a single lamp. The pages smelled faintly of damp paper and time. For the first time, I noticed something small I'd missed before a faint pencil mark beside one of his saved coordinates not far from where the first camp had been found. A circle, then a small arrow drawn away from it. Nothing official, nothing logged. Just a man's quiet notation to himself. I don't know why, but it felt like a whisper, like someone leaving a window cracked on purpose. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was his way of saying, "Here's where I stopped believing in maps." Still, I took a photo and sent it to Paul. He texted back half an hour later. "Keep it. Maybe someone someday will know what he saw." Sometimes I wonder if the reason the trail never made sense is because it wasn't meant to not to us anyway. Maybe Michael Reed wasn't looking for Daniel Cormier at all. Maybe he was looking for the same silence that took him. It's strange how stories like this end. There's no courtroom, no confession, no final headline. Just the steady hum of a life that once intersected with yours and left an empty chair where you thought someone might come back to sit. Sarah still visits the cabin once a month, even when it's empty. She says she likes to air it out, keep it alive. Sometimes when I join her, we'll sit on the porch steps and listen to the wind moving through the pines. Neither of us says much. There's a peace in that, I think, a kind of understanding that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. But every now and then, usually when the weather turns, I'll catch myself standing by the trailhead, staring north toward that border he was walking toward. The air gets thin there, sharper, cleaner, as if it's been filtered through everything he left behind. And in that stillness, I swear the forest seems to breathe again, slow and deliberate, like it's remembering a man who once walked too far and wrote it down for someone to find. Time has a way of dulling even the sharpest mysteries, sanding down their edges until they blend into the rest of life. But some stories don't fade. They stay suspended in the air like a scent you can't quite place a sound. You keep hearing long after it's gone quiet. For me, that's what Michael Reed became. Not just a case file, not even a memory, but a presence that lingers somewhere between question and answer. It's been a few years now since Paul retired, since the volunteers made their last trip north. The official paperwork still lists Michael as missing, presumed deceased. There were no more sightings, no new notes, no trace of his remains. Search crews stopped filing reports. The Facebook page his family made hasn't updated in over a year, and the world has largely moved on. But around here it never really ended. Not for Sarah, not for me, and probably not for anyone who ever set foot in those woods. Sarah still owns the cabin. She keeps it rented most weekends, even winters now. People love that place, the wood stove, the tall windows, the quiet. They don't know about the man who walked down the gravel drive one spring morning and never came back. Sometimes when guests do ask, she tells them a gentler version, that he was a good man who loved hiking, that the woods took him, and that we still look. She says it kindly, like a prayer she's memorized. And then after they leave, she locks up, stands on that same porch where he stood, and watches the trees for a long time. I visit her every so often. We'll share coffee on the porch or fix a hinge that sticks. The forest around the cabin has changed, thicker in some places, thinner in others. What used to be a narrow road is now half gravel, half grass. The old security camera stopped working a year ago, and neither of us bothered replacing it. There's a peace in not recording everything and letting some moments live without proof. Michael's family held a second memorial this past spring, quieter than the first. Just his parents, his sister, and a few of us from town. They'd brought a small wooden cross with his name carved into it and asked permission to place it near the trailhead where he was last seen. The Forest Service agreed, so now there's a simple marker at the edge of the lot. Nothing elaborate, just a cross and a bronze plate that reads, "He walked his own path." I think it fits him. Every time I see that marker, I think about the last note he left and the man he mentioned by name, Daniel Cormier, the hiker who vanished years before him. Their two lives never crossed, not in any official sense, but they share the same strange symmetry. Men who stepped into the wilderness and disappeared into it, leaving behind coordinates and questions that never quite add up. Maybe Michael was trying to solve Daniel's mystery, or maybe he saw something of himself in it. Or maybe he was trying to prove that no one ever truly vanishes, not if someone's still searching. The county eventually released most of the evidence back to his family. The jacket stayed with the sheriff's office for a while, sealed in plastic, then was sent to the state archives. His laptop was donated to the police academy where trainees study unsolved cases. Every few years, a new cadet calls me asking about it, trying to make sense of the coordinates and notes. They always think they're the one who'll find the missing link. I don't discourage them. I just tell them to tread gently because the woods remember everything even when we don't. As for Paul, he took his wife and moved south after he retired somewhere warmer. We still talk every Christmas. He always brings up the case not out of obsession but out of respect. He says it's the one that taught him that truth doesn't always fit inside a report. Some endings he told me once aren't found. They're accepted. I think he's right. Bill Pruitt still hunts the ridge every fall. He's slower now, hip surgery and all, but he says he still feels Michael's presence out there. Last season he told me he heard something strange, a low hum like wind caught in a hollow. Said it came from the same direction where he found the jacket years ago. He followed the sound but found nothing. Maybe just the forest talking, he said, half smiling. Maybe it was. The woods speak in their own language, the creak of trees, the sigh of moss giving underfoot, the whisper of water beneath stone. If you stay still long enough, you can almost convince yourself it's trying to tell you something. Sometimes on clear evenings I'll drive up near the trailhead and park just before dusk. I'll walk a bit not far, just until the light filters gold through the canopy. The air there always feels a little different, older somehow, charged with a kind of remembering. I'll stand by that cross, listen to the breeze moving through the pines, and think about how many people have come and gone through this valley, each leaving their own small trace. Some leave footprints, others stories. Michael left both, but the forest kept the rest. There's a peace in not knowing everything. I didn't used to believe that. I thought every mystery had to be solved, every name accounted for, every line followed to its end. But life teaches you that some trails fade because they're meant to. They lead somewhere we can't go. Maybe that's what Michael understood when he wrote those words, that reaching farther isn't about distance but surrender. Sarah once asked me if I thought he'd wanted to disappear. I told her I didn't know. But truthfully, I think he found something out there. Maybe not an answer, but a kind of stillness that made sense to him. People like Michael don't run away. They go towards something only they can see. And sometimes the journey itself becomes the destination. Every so often a hiker will post a photo online of that cross or the old campsite we found and tag it with his name. Some write messages, some just light a candle emoji. The comments are kind, quiet, respectful. A few say they've been inspired to hike more carefully, to leave coordinates when they travel alone. If that's his legacy, then it's a good one, not fear, but awareness. A reminder that the wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes, and that even the calmest people can carry storms we never see. The forest around Stowe has changed since that spring in 2021, but not enough to forget. The trees that framed the cabin have grown taller, their roots pushing through the gravel road like veins. The porch boards creak louder now. The wind still finds its way through the same cracks, the same places where memory lives. Some nights when it blows from the north, it carries that faint scent of smoke, not wood smoke, but something older, thinner. It's probably nothing. But I like to think it's the forest exhaling, reminding me it's still there, still holding what it's been asked to keep. There's a point in every story where you have to stop searching and start listening. That's what I've learned from all this. The silence tells its own truth if you let it. It says that life keeps moving even when we don't understand it. That some people leave to find peace and others stay behind to remember. That not every mystery is meant to be solved, only witnessed. If you ever find yourself walking in the woods alone, pause for a moment. Listen. You might hear a branch creak, a crow call, a gust of air threading through the trees. Or maybe, just maybe you'll hear what I do. The echo of a man's footsteps fading into the distance, steady and calm, as if he finally found what he was looking for. If this story stayed with you, share it not for views, but so no one's name gets lost to the dark.